Welcome to the screencast on Cascading Style Sheets, the fix to HTML that allows for a much more dynamic, beautiful World Wide Web. So Cascading Style Sheets create or define styles on how the HTML elements themselves should be displayed. Browsers get to render these HTML elements for display. But there was a fundamental problem with HTML before 4.0 that there was no way of describing or telling the browsers how these elements should be rendered. There was no format tags in HTML, or very few. HTML just describes the structure and content of the document, not how it should be rendered. It has some suggestions like heading size, or headings, but that doesn't tell you, should it be bold, should it be centered, should it be italicized, unless you add the I tag. So there are some HTML 3.2 did add some format tags like font, and that allows you to define the font for the element. And there are, bold tags and strong tags and EM tags and I tags, but again, it's up to the browser to actually say what does a strong tag get rendered as. So by adding these style sheets, we separate the display from the structure. So now we can apply a display commands or display suggestions that are separate from the structure or the HTML document itself. So what are CSS files? They're really a collection of Cascading Style Sheet rules. A rule has basically two parts. There's a selector that says, what does this rule apply to? And then a declaration of saying, what are we going to do to the things that are selected by this, or that are valid or selected by this rule. So selectors can be an element, so you can actually have the tag. For example, the table would create, if you said the selector was table, then you're saying I want this rule to apply to all tables in the document. If we use the pound and then the ID, that's saying apply this selector to the element with the ID that I'm supplying. For example, pound cam. A HTML element in the document that had the ID cam, the rule would apply. You can say period and then the class name. So that's saying all the elements that have a class with the name, with this particular name, fancy, the rule, this style rule applies to. Or you can do asterisk that says, well, applies to everything. And then inside the rule, we have a set of properties and values. So the property defines what you want to cause the browser to display. So you might say the color of the text, a background image, the font size, all sorts of different properties are valid in your CSS files. And then if you want to have a comment in your CSS file to say, oh, this is explaining what this CSS rule is specific for, or maybe organizing your CSS rules, you can use the classic C comment in it. So here's an example of three different rules that are in. So the first one, we take the ID info bar single. So somewhere in the HTML document should be an HTML element that's got an ID called info bar single. And then the space A is saying all links inside that info bar single element, these rules apply to all links inside that element. So we're going to say float to the right, which means it will shift to the right, and then we text align to the right. So we're going to say the text should be aligned to the right. Then the next rule is for the class responsive image. Anything that has any HTML element that's got a class responsive image, it's going to have a max width of 95%, so it won't quite fill the area that it's in, and it'll have its height automatically adjusted. So if it's in a smaller space, it will get smaller. And then comment saying how you can make YouTube videos responsive. We're making another class rule where we say that we need to have the HTML element should have the class video-container. We've set its position to relative. We make sure that it's padded on the bottom. We pad on the top. We set its height to 0. We set the overflow to hidden, so if it doesn't fit in, it falls off, and then we set the margin. So that's a way to make YouTube videos more responsive. If you shrink the screen, things will change. So, what are the selectors? Like I said before, you can have element, which you say P or div or anything. You put a comma between them, so it will select all. It's an and, so it selects all divs and all Ps. So putting a comma in there allows you to say this selector and this selector. They don't. Either of those are true. It will select those. If you have a space without the comma, it's all of the second selector within the matching outer selector. So, and that's in the hierarchy, it's going to be all multiple depth. If you do the element and then the greater than element, it says the parent. So if you're a grandchild, it's not, it's direct parent. So it's the outer one must, in this example here, the outer one must be a div, and then all children, direct children of divs that are Ps are selected. Element plus, it's after. So if you have a div followed by a P, so that's the element after the div. It's not embedded inside, it's after. You could then say attribute with the brackets. So you could say, if there's an attribute in the HTML element whose name is target, then we're going to select that element. If you say attribute equals value, we will match that attribute's name and the value. So it's, for example, if the target is foo, then it will select only the ones that have target who's equal to foo. Attribute not equal or not equal, it's tilde value, elements with the title containing bar. So it's the value in the attribute's value. You know, you could say class tilde equals and something, so that because the class attribute has many different classes, can have many classes in it. And then if we use the bar equals, we're looking at the first beginning of the value string, not somewhere in the value string, whereas the tilde equals, it's somewhere in the string we have the thing. If we use the bar equals, then it's at the beginning of that value string. So these are different selectors, and you could build these rules up very, very complicated, as you can imagine, rules for how we want to build up the selector to say, when does this style apply to the HTML element? So how do we insert these style sheets into our HTML? First off, or one of the easy way, is you create your style file. It's a set of, like I said in a couple slides ago, it's a set of select rules in a text file. And then you, in the head, you say this link, relationship, style sheet. So we're telling HTML that this is a style sheet. We tell its type, so it knows that it's text and it's going to be CSS. And then you have a reference, a URL to the resource. So now, when the browser is getting this HTML response from the request, it will see this link. It will then go grab that style sheet, and it will know to use that style sheet to help render the rest of the HTML. We could inline it or make it internal, so we have the style tag that we talked about a couple of days ago, and then we actually have the selectors and their rules. It's inline. You have your style sheet in the head of the HTML document. Or you can actually, like we talked before, set the attribute of any element and have a set of the properties that we want to set. So we can, in the style, we say, for this paragraph, we're going to say the text color is going to be green, and we're going to make the margin left 10 pixels. So this will apply that style to this paragraph. Very specific. So what happens when we have multiple styles and multiple files and ways of getting them in? So how does this cascading effect work? Well, the ordering is, first off, if you inline the style, as in you have the style attribute on the element, that takes precedence. And that's the first thing that will be what's used. In the head element, if you have the style tag, that will be next used. And then in the external CSS file, that is used third. So you can override the use by, if you put it in the HTML element in the style attribute, that will always happen. If it's in the head as a style, that's the next most thing that's applied, and then the external CSS file. If you have multiple links to CSS files, however, the last one is the one that is applied. So that's how they resolve the issue of multiple CSS links. The one that's furthest down on the page is the one that will be used if you didn't do it in the style in the head, or if the element is not inlined. So that's something to think about when you're using multiple style files, that you want to make sure that you get them in the right order when you're using links, because you might inadvertently override a style if you have multiple links. Just something to think about. So what are the kinds of things that you can style? You can style the background of the HTML element. You can set its color, its image, whether it repeats in the X direction, repeats in the Y direction. By default, they repeat in both X and Y. Does the image or the element scroll when you scroll down the page, or does it stay fixed and scroll up or down? Where in the page does this background appear? So this can be done on any HTML element. Normally you would probably, if you want a big page, you might style the body so you get a background image on the whole page. There's some other things. Many of these styles also have a shorthand. So instead of having to set the background color, the background image in another role, the repeat in another role, the attachment and position, you can do it in all one line that says background, and then you can see that there's a color, and then an image URL, a no repeat, and then the position. The processing of these style sheets are smart enough that if you put them in the wrong order, it's not going to get totally confused. So if you drop the color and have just URL, no repeat, right top, it's not going to try to process the URL and say, oh, that's going to be my background color. The processing is smart enough to not screw that up. So some of these are not necessary. It knows that if it's a color, it should be a color. Then I'm looking for an image. If it's not there, I won't put the image. Then I'm looking for a repeat, then I'm looking for attachment. So it's a way of shorthanding your, instead of having to write more text into your file, you can make a quicker rule. You can style text. To style text, you use the name color, that's setting it. Text alignment, do we want it left, centered, right, or justified? The text decoration, do we want some line through it, overline, underline, or text transform? We can uppercase things, lowercase things, capitalize things. Inherit is saying, I want to inherit that particular feature from the outer element. Most things do inherit down below. So if the text is inside of something that says set the color of the text, it will inherit those styles. You can style links. These are attributes on the link. So if we a:*link, that is saying I want this rule to apply to unvisited links. So anything that you have not clicked on or the user hasn't clicked on, this style will apply to. Visited means if it's been visited before, we're going to style it differently. If the mouse is over it, we want to apply a new style to when you hover over, or active is the selected link. Common properties for links. would be you would then set its text decoration. Do you want to cross through it? Do you want it underlined? Is it colored? Common by default. Unvisited links are blue, visited links are purple. Maybe that style, that coloring does not match what you want to do with your web page. So you can change the visited and unvisited colors with these selectors. And then again, the background color, maybe you want to have the background color subtly different for things that have been visited. Very powerful way of styling links. So very nice. Styling lists, we use the property list style image. So we could, instead of having a bullet, we could have an image. So you want a smiley face or anything you want, any image. The position, is it inside or outside? So where does the bullet live? You know, does it go inside the thing, outside? And then they actually have a whole bunch of styles that are default. So you could say disc, decimal, which means there'll be numbers, a circle, square. They got hiragana. They got all sorts of different styles of if you're using a numbered list, you can go ABC, or you can go I, or there's all sorts of different possible list style types. Take a look at the W3C schools for a whole selection of them. There are just tons of them. And then the shorthand, again, you're saying I want square, I want it inside, here's the image I want to use. So normally it's the type, the position, image. So again, if you drop one of those, it's smart enough to render it generally. All HTML elements are considered boxes, where CSS is applying the style to this box or rectangle. So there on the center is the content. So that's like the text or the link or the something. Around the content is a padding, which allows you to give a little space from the content to a border, which allows you to have a border around the content. And then there's a margin that allows us to give us space between this element and the one adjacent to it, left or right or top or bottom. So all four of these, well, the three of them, the margin, the border, and the padding, allow us to change the way the shape of the box is. So we can change, for example, the background of the content or the background of the border, or what the border is, the width of the border. So there's a lot of things we can do to change the way our content looks like and space it on the page. Very important to know about this idea of content. We've got a padding that then has a border around it and then has a margin. It gives you a lot of power over how to render these HTML elements, and each element has these same concepts. So how do we style the box? Well, the property margin top, margin right, margin bottom allow us to control the margin, which is the outer piece between our box and the next box. Border width, border style, border color, border radius. So we can have border radiuses. So instead of having square pointy corners, we can have rounded corners. There's top, bottom, top, right, bottom, left. We can combine border top radius, border top right radius, border left color. There's all sorts of combinations we can do with borders. And then padding, again, padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. So we're going from top, for these four ones, we go from the top around the corners. We'll talk about that here. So the shorthand says, if I supply four values, I'm gonna do the top, and then the right, then the bottom, and then the left. So this first example is the top margin is 25 pixels, the right margin is 50 pixels, the bottom is 75, and the left is 100. If we use three values in the second choice, we're styling the top to be 25, the top padding, the right and left, because left is not supplied here, it gets the right and left. So the right and left will be 50, and the bottom will be 75. If we use two values, we're saying that the top and bottom are 25, and the left and right are 50. If we only have one value, all four get the same value. So you can supply all four values, three values, which means that the left and the right are the same, two values, which says top and the bottom, and left and right, and then everything gets the same value. So those are the shorthands for doing these four-sided properties.